What's your I met a celebrity but didn't let on that I knew who they were story? My mom yelled at Pierce Brosnan. She and my dad were at a ski resort getting lunch. My mother gets quite hangry, an unfortunate tray I inherited, and was waiting in line to order. Right as she's about to order, a guy tried to cut in front of her and interrupt her. She snapped and told him to go to the back of the line like everyone else. She got her food and went back to my dad sitting there mouth wide open in shock. Do you know who that was? No. That was Pierce Brosnan. This doesn't count because it's about my father-in-law. And he legitimately didn't know who she was. But we were vacationing in Maine and spending a lot of time on the beach. My father-in-law would walk his dog early every one morning. He met this lady and they would meet up and walk their dogs together, then go their separate ways. One morning I got up early to come with him. And to my surprise, we met up with Sigourney Weaver and went for a walk. I was 10 years old in 2002 when my mom took me to the Bronx Zoo for the first time. It was a rainy day, so we practically had the whole place to ourselves except for 3 British kids running around. Chaperoned by a woman. My mom quickly befriended the woman while I made like a kid and joined the horde. Looking at spiders and scorpions and sharing in the awe and excitement of the animals. After about an hour, when we said our goodbyes, my mother told me that the kid, Daniel, who I had been hanging out with, had played Harry Potter in the movie that came out last year. I had thought he looked familiar. My cousin rode a ski lift with Jack Black in Vail. Just the two of them. Her husband and I were in the lift behind them. Freaking out. When we got off the lift, they'd gone their separate ways. We made our way to her. She was like, wow. That guy on my lift was so nice. We were like, no shit, that was Jack Black. She was like the School of Rock guy. She was so embarrassed. She said she rambled on about living in Iowa for most of their conversation. We laughed our asses off. One of my best friend's doppelganger is Ethan Hawke. Like, it's scary how much he resembles him. To the point that during those stupid Facebook challenges he just changed his profile picture to him and nobody realized it. Also, his favorite story was one time at San Diego Comic Con he actually confused Rosario Dawson at a hotel bar. Anyway, one night I'm walking home from work in Nick. And I see who I thought was my friend John just walking on a kind of secluded part of 9th Ave around Hell's Kitchen. And I yell, John. He doesn't turn around. So I decide to yell it again. And instead of responding, his pace quickens. I decide the best thing to do is to run at him, which seemed to terrify him, as keep in mind it's late and there are very few people around. Anyway, I catch up to him and say, oh, you're not John, and then walk away from what was a very frightened Ethan Hawke. My friend's mom, over 70 years old, owns a small Asian grocery store. Post Malone came walking in with his girlfriend and his mom had no idea who he was. A few cute things happened. 1. She was nervous because of his tattoos. But happy, not worried once he bought a lot of food. She had no idea he was a celebrity. 2. She gave him a free snack for buying so much food and told him to come back for lunchtime for cheap and tasty gyoza. He did come back the next day. 3. She was worried he would get mugged going to his car because of 3 big men outside, so she followed him outside. They were his bodyguards. 4. She really liked his cool car. It was a Lamborghini. She told my friend about the encounter that evening and he pulled up a YouTube video based on the description. It was him. When Post Malone came back the next day for gyoza, she got a selfie with him. It's on my friend's phone, so I don't have the picture available right now. Whole thing is adorable with how innocent his mom is. I worked at a movie theater in Albuquerque at the time they were filming the first Avengers film. Captain America was about to come out. I remember because we had the huge standee of him in the lobby. I was reading in the box office when 3 people came up. Guy asked for 3 tickets to Bridesmaids. It was dark out and he had a green baseball cap and sunglasses. He paid with a credit card. Christopher Evans. I stared at the card after I swiped it. Handed it back. I need you to sign the receipt. He did. And then he walked in. Edit. Thanks for all the comments guys. Just to add on, I didn't recognize the other two with him. One was a blonde woman and the other was a guy with buzzed hair and a 6 o'clock shadow. Captain America was about to come out. The fanfiction communities will appreciate this one. Working cashier at a tiny candy store during a lull. And suddenly we're swarmed with black suits and shades. Some guys in suits come in with more shades shadowing them. They browse, buy chocolates, and hand them to another suit. I joked to one guy about that box definitely not being big enough for everyone. And he laughs and buys 3 more. They pack up and shades escort them out. Couldn't have been more than 10 minutes. When I went home, I found out that Air Force 2 had landed for a conference nearby. And I had managed to convince the Secretary of something, Defense, I believe, to buy $200 of chocolate. So you're the reason military spending is out of control. I used to be a server at a Mexican restaurant right outside LA in the late 90s. One day Leonardo DiCaprio came in with who I assume was his mom to have lunch. This would have been post-Titanic, so really at the peak of his breakthrough mega celeb status. He was wearing a ball cap, sunglasses and unshaven, but I recognized him anyway. I didn't let anyone know and I wrote something like "Your movies are awesome. I hope you liked our food" on his receipt when I dropped it off at the table. After he left, I swung by and picked up his payment and he had left me a note back that said "Thank you so much for not blowing my cover" with a $100 tip. He was awesome. I was only like 19. I went and got some PlayStation games with it after my shift ended. My dad met Robin Williams in an elevator. He got in and they rode a few floors in silence. They stopped on a floor and a bunch of fans ran in and started getting pics with Robin. My dad said he was gracious and took pics with everyone. The doors closed and they rode a few more floors and my dad turned and said, "Does it ever get old?" And Robin smiled and said, "Nope. Never." Then my dad got off on his floor and they nodded to one another and my dad went on with his day. This happened yesterday. My wife took my son to the zoo. And he wanted to read every little plaque in the reptile area. My wife was distracted for a moment. So he asked the nearest stranger to read the plaque for him. My mom is a big sports fan. One time she was shopping at and saw a really large, fit-looking man who she didn't immediately recognize but seemed familiar. She thought it must have been a professional football player or something. So she went up to the only other person in the shop, who was this smaller weird-looking guy, and asked him if he knew who the athletic-looking man was. The short guy looked at my mom and said, "That's my bodyguard. I'm Elton John." I helped Steven Spielberg move his daughter's bags into her college dorm. I was working a shift helping first years move in and I see a guy in a hat and sunglasses who is unmistakably Spielberg. I strike up a conversation, ask if he needs help with the bags, etc. First names only. We're from CA. My wife, Kate, and I sent all our kids to East Coast schools though. Stuff like that. Later, when his daughter opened the door for the first time, he whipped out a camcorder and, wearing the biggest dad grin, recorded the whole thing before turning the camera on my friend and me to ask us about the city. So, I have a supporting the luggage speaking role in a limited release home movie film shot by Steven Spielberg. My sister had an encounter with Jack Black where she didn't know it was him. We were at a concert for my uncle's band and she texted me from downstairs while she was charging her phone. I totally just had a conversation with someone who looked like a fatter Jack Black. I texted her back that our uncle knows Jack Black and that was definitely him. Good thing she didn't do the whole "do you ever get that you look like a heavier Jack Black" thing. I, almost literally, ran into Shaq at a small restaurant in LA. He was standing in the doorway. You know how some people are so tall you don't see them? So I'm exiting the doorway and say, "Excuse me man," and he stepped aside so I could leave. He is one large human being. In the mid-90s I was a cab driver. Our service was like a cross between a limo and a taxi. And we serviced some fancy resorts. As I dropped off my passenger at a resort, Another guy asks if I'm a taxi. And I say yes. So he tells his friend their cab is here. His friend got in the car and said this ain't no cab. Smells too good to be a cab in that unmistakable Chris Rock voice. He and his friend just bullshitted with each other for the 15-minute drive to a local nightclub. There was a white kid trying to talk to a yellow cab driver ahead of us in the parking lot and Chris Rock started imitating the kid. Like I need a ride. Yeah. I'm drunk. But I need a ride. And I was trying really hard not to laugh out loud. He wasn't nearly as famous yet at the time. But I had seen his stand-up routines on Comedy Central and knew exactly who he was. But didn't go fanboy on him. 10/10 would drive Chris Rock again. I was at IKEA in Vancouver and noticed this lady in a low-hanging hat had dropped something. I helped her pick it up and noticed it was Sarah McLachlan. Didn't let on that I knew who she was because I couldn't think of anything to say. This meeting will haunt me for the rest of my life. Like your damn pet commercials. Met Elon Musk in a Tesla store in LA. Really wanted to meet him but didn't want to be that guy. Decided I had a plan. So walked up to him and said, "Excuse me. Do you work here?" He replied, "I mean yeah kind of." I say, what can you tell me about the entertainment console of the Model S?" He says, "Let me see if I can find someone to help you." To which I say, "Nah, I'm just f***ing with you." He laughed and shook my hand and walked off. Used to work at a posh hotel and we had wedding there all the time. I was pretty young at the time. Say 15. David Tennant was at one wedding. Dr. F. King Who and I was pouring him coffee. At first I was sat there thinking is he isn't he, so I was playing it cool. I went back to the kitchen to top up more coffee in my coffee jug and the staff were talking about it too before deciding it actually was David Tennant. Spent the rest of the night playing it cool because I was in that whatever stage of teenage life. Inside I was freaking out. When I was younger with fewer responsibilities I used to just drive around for the hell of it. To me, driving is a hobby. Late at night was my favorite time. The streets are empty. My uncle is like this too. I asked him if he wanted to meet at American Coney Island. We sat down in a booth. A couple guys walked in after us and sat down behind us. Eminem, Dr. Dre, and a guy I later found out was Jimmy Iovine. We paid them no attention. But we knew who they were. They finished before us and as they were walking out, Eminem nodded at us and said, "Thanks for not making a big deal about this. We got you." He and the other guys disappeared around the corner. M took that pretty well considering you acted like you forgot about Dre. Robin Williams used to walk around my lone childhood country town near SF. I saw him once, after hearing many rumors about his sightings. Not entirely unlike Bigfoot or Nessie sightings. My brain didn't fully comprehend what it was seeing. But I could tell he was trying his very best to remain incognito and not draw any unwanted attention. We locked eyes. He smiled. I smiled and nodded back. And we both went our separate ways. Worked at a hotel and Russell Crowe came in the lobby. He went to the house phones and called front desk. Where I was working. I could see him pretty easily. I answered the phone and he asked to be connected to a room so I put him through. This wasn't long after he threw a phone at a hotel clerk so I didn't want to take a chance at pissing him off. Not sure if this counts but when I was 15 I was really into playing StarCraft, being a 3-month-old game at the time, on Battle.net. I did mostly 3v3 games. After finishing this one particularly epic match, close game, we won. We all got into a chat room to talk about how fun that was. One of them says something to the effect of not sure if you all care but you just beat Ben Affleck. Of course we all ask him to prove it. So he told us to wait a minute and visit his official website's message board, benaffleck.com or something like that. He had just made a post in Red being Ben Affleck himself, about just losing a game of StarCraft. We briefly chatted with him and that was it. Samuel L. Jackson was on my flight. I was second to last aboard the flight and there was all this commotion with the flight attendants and gate crew. Once I approached the door of the plane I realized they were all looking at Samuel L. Jackson. He was standing by the cockpit making himself available to passengers' fans. I played it cool. Didn't say a word. Turns out, I'm shy around celebrities. I'm just glad I didn't make a snakes on the plane joke. About 5 years ago my dad was in LA for business and got into the elevator of his hotel to head down to one of his meetings. When he got in, he instantly recognized a huge, legendary, Hall of Fame LA Laker standing next to him. Normally, my father would never say anything but for some reason felt compelled to introduce himself. He stuck out his hand and said, "Shaq. It's nice to meet ya." He immediately realized he messed up and the guy responded, "I'm Magic Johnson but it's nice to meet you too." The second-hand embarrassment is real. Before I realized who he was, Sean Alexander asked me if I liked football. I told him I liked the Steelers. He said, "Yeah. I lost to them in the Super Bowl." I felt pretty stupid, but he thought it was funny. Super nice guy. I was at a test screening of the movie Valkyrie. Me and my friends were near the front of the theater talking before the movie started. And I went on this big, loud rant about how normally I like Tom Cruise movies but War of the Worlds was such a piece of shitty. One of the worst movies I've ever seen. Plot didn't make sense. They strung a bunch of cool scenes together and put a shitty happy ending on it and called it a day. After I wrap up my 5-minute rant outlining everything wrong with War of the Worlds, the person sitting behind us tapped me on the shoulder and pointed 4 seats down in my row to Tom Cruise glaring at me. I gave him the nod and sat there for what might have been the longest 10 minutes before a movie started ever. Not quite what you were asking for but close enough for an excuse to tell that story. TLDR. Didn't notice Tom Cruise was listening while I talked shitty about one of his movies. I used to play in local bands in Seattle back in the late 90s. I was sitting in the Mecca, a bar in the Queen Anne neighborhood, and in walks this dude with another buddy and they sit down next to me. I didn't look up as I was enjoying a pint and a book. We all mutually knew the bartender well. They started talking about cars or something, then it led to music. I made a quick quip about Soundgarden and how I hoped that they would make another album. This was just before Down on the Upside. I heard the dude next to me say, "Wish granted. We are mixing it now." It was Chris Cornell and one of his friends. We talked for a while about Seattle music and playing shows. He asked more questions of me than I could of him. He was genuinely a humble, cool fellow musician. He treated me like an equal even though I knew and certainly know now that I am not. In that regard, I bumped into him a couple of other times over the years. He was always the same dude to me. R.I.P. Chris. Was at a convenience store in LA when me and a very nicely dressed black gentleman walked up to the cashier at the same time to pay. It was nighttime and he had his dark shades on and was talking on his phone. I gave him the after you gesture and he nodded and said thanks buddy. Paid and left. It wasn't until he was out of the store that I realized he was Jamie Foxx. Me and my wife were on a trip for 9 days with Rainn Wilson, Dwight from The Office, and his family. I know he doesn't like being treated like he's just a character from a TV show, so I refrained from mentioning it or even letting on that I knew he was a famous actor. One day he had a sandwich with some beetroot in it. Turns to his wife and says these beets are really amazing. It took every bit of me not to say something about Dwight then. He's a fantastic guy. And his family is lovely. My brother used to work a parking booth at a lake where Chuck Woolery used to fish. Chuck would pull up and my brother would say, $5. Chuck would then start to find ways to make clear who he was, Chuck Woolery. My brother would respond with, $5.